Welcome to Persuasive Communication and Leadership, transforming information to intelligence, exacerbated by COVID-19. My name is Tom Scotto. I am the Senior Director of Enterprise Digital Design Systems for CVS. And this is a topic I'm particularly passionate about. Maybe it's from some of my previous work as a coach within sports, but pretty much my entire life has been working with, tripping over, and dealing with communication along the way, and seeing how communication impacts leadership. And a lot of what we do in communication, and particularly in leadership, is that persuasive quality, helping people understand where we're coming from, and being able to get people to take that sort of direction and have that communication, that dialogue open. So throughout my career, I've kind of worked in numerous opportunities that have helped me to enhance this communication model that I've used, and hopefully you'll get some benefit from it as we move through it. So we're going to talk about the impact of communication. How does communication affect leadership? Attributes of effective communication, levels of information detail, and some other considerations with our unfortunate COVID-19 friend in there. And I will give a few in real life practical applications to that. At the end, we'll have 10 minutes, I believe, to do some Q&A. So what is the impact of communication? A question for you: how much time do you spend communicating during the day? And there's a number of ways that we communicate. I'm not going to read through the list here. I think it's a short list. There's probably a longer list to this if you think about your work environment, your industry, your personal life. There's just so much communication. Just looking at the top two, we have meetings and presentations. Here we are in a presentation right now. And then there's emails. I don't know about you, but I think my email box is like 2,000 deep. And I'm always trying to figure out more effective ways to carve through that and effectively respond. I do have some tips towards the end on how to apply some of these concepts into you replying and being more effective with email. So let's talk about how communication affects leadership. And this is a connection that I've seen over the years. As I mentioned earlier, I've been in a number of different leadership roles. I've been in technology for 30 years, but I've also functioned as a professional athletic coach. And I've just been in different circumstances where I've seen my communication fall flat. I've seen it be effective. And I'm always trying to figure out, how can I articulate in such a way that really gets that point across, that motivates, that innovates, that teaches, mentors, whatever it is. There's just so much communication involved. Also, I am currently working within the design realm. So there's a lot of communication. I would say 90% of design is communicating. You're communicating through the visual aspect. You're communicating through messaging, voice, color. There's just a lot going on there. Not to mention all the communication that goes into, talking to teammates and collaborating and bringing groups together to come up with the actual concepts and such. One of the things that I've seen over the years is this disconnect between intelligence and information. And we're big on information these days. We love data. We love throwing lots of data out there, and that's awesome. I'm a big fan of that. But I'm a bigger fan of intel. And one of the ways I see this play out within the organization is if you start at the bottom of this diagram that's on the right, you have your team members. Those are the people that are frontline. They're doing the work. They're executing. And oftentimes they have the most knowledge about what happens in your organization, the best insight in how your products, your services are operating, are sort of resonating, and you want that intel from them. If you don't have a really good way, or you're not training your people to not just vomit data everywhere, but really convert that into intel, you wind up with a lot of noise going up into sort of the executive level. And some of it gets ignored, it gets buried. And oftentimes what happens is you wind up with either indecision or misalignment coming down, which frustrates everybody, particularly the teams who are executing the work. They look at leadership like, you guys aren't really paying attention. You don't know what's going on. There's a loss of respect. There's a loss of productivity, definitely a loss of innovation. If you can train people to grab the nuggets, prioritize how they're providing this information, and turn it into intelligence, now you're passing valuable nuggets up the line, which those who handle strategy and look at sort of direction can grab very valuable and then align the company back down. And then when those on the front line see how the leadership is aligning, it resonates while they're listening. This aligns with how we're experiencing the customer. It's a very, very positive scenario. But this aggregation and synthesis of information is a learned skill. We need to train ourselves and our people. And we need to make it clear what information is most important so people know, here's what this particular team or this particular leadership group needs to be able to function. And honestly, if you're in a position or you're thinking, wow, I don't really trust the intel I'm getting from those people on my team, you've unfortunately hired the wrong people, and you've got to figure out how to deal with that. Let's look at communication, leadership, and effectiveness. And a couple of scenarios here, we'll just kind of look through them very quickly. One is I am not in a leadership position and I have poor communication skills. What's the result of that? Well, you become a burden on leadership. You're not trusted. Most likely your career path is going to be stunted moving forward. If you're not in a leadership position, but you have strong communication skills, you become valuable to leadership. You're trusted, you're given responsibility, visibility, most likely good for your career path. If you're now in a leadership position with poor communication skills, you wind up wasting company time and resources, you're frustrating teams, and potentially leading in wrong and dangerous directions. Ultimately, we want to be a leader with strong communication skills. That's going to have a positive impact on company goals, inspire your teams, innovate. That's what we're looking for. There was something put out in Forbes magazine. It was back in 2016 by William Arruter, and it was this interesting look at leaders versus managers in a mindset. And the reason I want to highlight that word mindset is a lot of us have titles of manager. And this is not a diss on the manager title. It's more of how do we approach the role? Do we approach it in a leadership perspective? Do we approach it in a manager perspective? I'm not going to read all the bullet points here, but what you want to look at is how do leaders and managers communicate differently? The top two, I think, are sort of a good indication as to where this list is going. Leaders create a vision, managers create goals, leaders are change agents, managers maintain the status quo, et cetera, et cetera. So just something to kind of take a look at, even maybe assess yourself, your team, and sort of see, like, do I have that manager mindset? Do I have that leadership mindset? Obviously, the leadership mindset overall is more effective. Let's look at some attributes of persuasive communication. So some of the key things we want to look at here is research, for one. You want whatever you're providing to someone that you're trying to change how they feel, you're trying to change what they believe, basing something on research is going to be your best bet in getting that point across. It needs to provide direct value to them, not just a broad value, but it really has to be valuable to the person you're talking to or the group you're talking to. It needs to be actionable. It needs to be something they can obtain, not just step one, but like if there's 10 steps in what you're communicating, all 10 steps need to be obtainable in some fashion or another. And I think in today's day and age, if whatever you're doing, whether it's service-based, product-based, thought leadership, if it's not scalable, it's probably not done very well. And it's something you'll have to revisit. So these 5 attributes are very important in being able to influence and persuade how someone thinks. One of my favorite authors has a quote, "For thought is a bird of space that in a cage of words may indeed unfold its wings, but cannot fly." And I know at the time of this presentation, it's to be like 9 in the morning, probably you haven't had enough coffee to like, okay, he's going to give me these crazy sayings. But this one always resonated with me because it could be a lot of words that we use to explain things. We can, try different angles and just lots of dialogue. But ultimately, if we're not communicating effectively, it's sort of like this bird, which is, sort of the words trapped in a cage, and it's not connecting with anyone. It's not able to really take off, whether it be an idea, an innovation, or just a concept. One of the key things that I've seen which has helped people communicate better, is understanding their audience and then respecting their time and needs in respect to the information that they need. On the sliding scale on the left, the very, very top is the least amount of information from a volume standpoint, and it's very strategic, just the facts. And you get down to the wider part of the pyramid where there's a lot of volume. That's very tactical, very buried in details. Not necessarily a bad thing. It just depends on who your audience is. And if we kind of broadly connect it to various levels of in the organization that have different levels of influence. Generally speaking, VPs, C-suite, they're looking for overall direction. They don't want that big, massive volume of information. Directors, they're directing, they're looking at impact, they're looking at strategy, another level of information. And the information gets bigger and bigger as you get towards the bottom. Your managers, they deal with roadmaps, planning, execution, operations, etc. And then when you get down to, again, this is from my team's approach, or my industry's approach of designers and engineers, we are at the execution level, and we need a lot of detail. And then, of course, there's going to be a lot of information that goes along with that. So it's very important to be able to connect the right information level, granularity, with the audience. One way to remember this is Todd. Say hi to Todd. So if you look at the T is in title or topic, O for objective, D for description, and D for detail. So this is something you can kind of think of, use it as a way to remember, to have Todd in there. And here's a question to ask yourself, and maybe even ask your team. It's a great exercise to see if people are really connecting with this concept. Is if you look at the list of sort of roles and levels in an organization on the left, ask what is their preferred level of detail. And not very descriptive on the right-hand side, but some sort of basically a illustration of the volume differences between title, topic versus an objective status versus a little bit of a description versus detail, too long, don't read, and getting them to a sense of like what information, what level of granularity should they be delivering to the people, and maybe even this list, or make up your own list based on your organizational structure. In addition to that, you want to prioritize the type of information that they need. So even though they might need a certain level of granularity, some of that might be status, priority, scope, urgency, roadblocks, target dates. Figure out what's important to that person. If you're a leader, you want to communicate this to those that are giving you information. Hey, this is what's most important for me in this order. If you want to get extra brownie points, talk to those that you're reporting into and say, hey, what is most important to you? How can I provide you information that is according to your priority? And be considerate to your audience. I think this is the big one. I've learned this lesson in an interesting way. But honestly, you want to be able to provide, if you have a list of things that you're talking with someone on, you want to be able to give them only the topic for each of those items, and only the topic. And let your audience choose and decide how much information they want. You want them to say, wow, that's very interesting. Tell me more about that. Very early in my tech career, I worked under someone named Tom Bilodeau. I think he's big into tennis now, so he's left tech. Tom, tell him I said hey. But I learned this part of this lesson from him, where I'd go into his office, I'd have a list of like 10 things, and he's like, all right, tell me what you got going on. And I would just start ripping through my project. Oh, project 1, project 2, here's all this detail. He's like, whoa, way too much information. Just give me one bullet for each project you're on. If I want more information, I'll ask you for it. And it felt awkward. I felt like it was like anticlimactic. I'm like, all right, fine, I'll give you one bullet. And I gave him a bullet from each one. And then he'd go, all right, number 3, tell me more about that. And then I would open up the fire hydrant of all this information. So no. Like, what's the status? So you can see how this process helped me define those 4 levels of information detail. And I got the chance to practice them, and I helped my team give me the appropriate information. And it's been a happy path for the most part. But that is really something that you want to think about, is giving the option for your audience to choose that information, that intelligence adventure. What are some other considerations? Well, let's talk a little bit about COVID. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. We all know the impact. We're feeling it. We're living it. But just calling attention to some things that I think have changed and impacted how we communicate, and the retention, the ability to absorb. We obviously have health and family, health with family and friends that we're concerned about, that we're navigating. I mean, the logistics of everything. Nothing is easy these days. If you've got kids, you've got childcare, schooling, there's additional stresses, finance, jobs, you name it. That loss of in-person group dynamic is a big part of how we communicate. Not only reading the audience, but getting energy back from a group in a meeting inspires those that are leading. It makes the meetings more dynamic and exciting. I think also a lack of environmental variety, where we used to go from meeting to meeting, different rooms. It kind of compartmentalizes things. More I think pronounced is I'm at home, I'm not at work, and now I'm at work, and then back at home. We have to put in manual, almost deliberate markers to go. I'm working now. I'm not working now, and hopefully we're doing that. If not, those are some boundaries you want to think of for yourself. How do I kind of keep work and the home? But this obviously has affected a lot of our communication. So some things to think about. One is answer first, is a principle we try to use. Someone asks a question. If it's a yes or no question, yes or no. Oftentimes people like to go on a very long qualification of their answer, which honestly sends the person asking on an emotional roller coaster. All right, so tell me, what's the status? Is the X project completed? You're like, all right, yeah, well, on the X project, so we ran into this challenge, and then the person who asked the question is like, great, that means the answer is no. And while we're doing that, we actually found a better way to achieve it. So we started to work on that. And now the person's like, oh, maybe the answer is going to be yes. But then, like later in the week, we ran into this other tech snag, and so this person's on this roller coaster. Just give them the answer. If they want more qualification, then give them that qualification and that clarification. I tried to took a stab at creating my own saying, as inspired by Kihil Gibran. And this is something I've seen. Insecurity can cause an avalanche of words that meaning cannot survive. And I think this is where even that answer first hesitation is, well, I've got to use all these words. I'm a little insecure. I don't want to deliver this bad news, whatever it might be. And then you wind up with, providing a lot of dialogue that maybe is not necessary, and the answer is lost in there. In a similar vein, question first. I'm sure you've experienced people that try to ask a question, and they start out with all the clarifications and all the factors, and you're sitting there ready to answer this question. Like, okay, was that the question? Oh, was this where they're? No, that's not where they're going. And finally, you get to the end of like a 5-minute, preamble, and you have to remember what was the question in the first place, and why did you give me all that other information? I don't understand. So ask the question first. If you're really succinct about it, keep that question very short. And if the person answering the question needs more information or clarification, they will ask. And speaking of clarification, here are some things that you can do in meetings and in follow-up emails that I found very helpful. When you're in a meeting, at the end of the meeting, okay, so is this what we've decided, concluded during the meeting? State it. Make sure that everybody's in agreement with it. You'll be surprised, this little thing, how many times we've left the meeting and we haven't summed it up. Same thing in an email. I do this all the time. Hey, that was a great meeting. Just recapping what we decided, recapping the next steps. That's always good too, if you have someone who kind of has amnesia and they forget what they've decided in a meeting. Like, I don't think we talked about that. When you send a follow-up email in writing, kind of hard to escape that, unless they want to hit reply and go after you on it. But I found that to be extremely helpful. A couple of in real life examples, practical ways to put these skills in practice. Obviously, bring Todd to your meetings. Is the level of information appropriate for the audience? Do you have the right audience in the first place? It's always a good thing to consider. Get people out of meetings that don't need to be in there. They can be very expensive. And then when you're setting expectations, think, what is the purpose of this meeting? Is the objective way too broad? The meetings tend to lose effectiveness when there's just so much information, and decisions are hard because the topics are disparate. And declare, here are the decisions we're going to make. Here are the next steps we're looking for, and save some time at the end to make sure that you did make those decisions and set those next steps. Quick pet peeve on stand-ups. I've been in a lot of companies that have these open floor plans, and you can see the different stand-ups and hear the different stand-ups going on. And I can hear people going off on these long sort of diatribes on something that they're doing in the stand-up. Or they're doing in their project. And if you want to sit down during a stand-up, most likely the stand-up needs some fine-tuning. So get people to be more succinct. If you have a scrum master or an agile coach, help people to get down to the nuggets of what a stand-up is. Yesterday I did X, today I'm going to do this. And if there's any blockers or obstacles, bring those up. Keep that in a very quick, informational, but effective manner, hence the stand-up. Visuals are also extremely important. As many of you are probably like me, work in very complex systems and processes. If you try to explain those verbally, it's a lot of effort. And oftentimes a picture or image is worth 1,000 words. It can reduce a lot of cognitive load. It creates clarity around the complexity because you can see it. It reduces time to digest it, so you have more time to actually discuss what it is that you need to talk about the complex system. And it provides some orientation and some common lexicon, which sometimes we're saying using words, acronyms, whatever it might be, and someone else has that acronym or that word in a different context. And finally, actionable and digestible emails. This is the world in which a lot of us live. 2 pointers that I found to be extremely helpful. One is to keep emails to a single topic when decision-making is the objective. If you try to cram too much in an email, it's like cramming too much stuff in a slide for PowerPoint. I'm not a big fan of that either. But keep that email really focused on the decision that you need to make, and provide some very clear objectives. If you got multiple topics and you don't want to break them up, just try not to keep decisions in there. Oftentimes, if there's multiple decisions that need to be made and someone has the answer to one, but they don't have the answer to, let's say, the other 2 of 3, they might not reply to your email right away because they're waiting to get the answer to all 3 questions. So if you want to get that quick turnaround, very quick email correspondence, this is a great way to do it. And then finally, organize that email and prioritize. And I tend to bold topic headers. So when I send out an email, he's like a little opening line, and then here's topic number 1, bold, very short sentence, maybe a couple of words, and then maybe a couple of sentences description. And it sounds really simple, but everyone I send emails to like that, they really appreciate it. One, it's easier to digest. There's not a lot of context switching. And then when we go back to talk about what I sent them in the email, their eye can easily index on those bullet points and the boldness of the titles. So hopefully some of this has been helpful. This is stuff that I've kind of tripped on and executed in various ways and have seen some success in my time, and hopefully it'll prove valuable to you as well. So at this point, we can take some time and open it up for some questions and feedback that you might have.
I can see Tom coming through now. Tom, can you hear me okay?
I can. It seems like the way we start every single meeting in real life now. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
A wave, a thumbs up. But yeah, good to see you, Tom. It's been a while for the purpose of the audience. Tom, as I mentioned in the intro, has worked with us on a few events in Boston during his time working for Wayfair. Tom's obviously now with CVS Health, so this is the first time I've heard from him since. So it was a really nice way to start the day and a great presentation there, Tom. Thanks for taking the time to do so and joining for the Q&A.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me again. It's always a pleasure.
Good stuff. Well, a few questions have come in here, so I guess we'll kick off with those. I've got some as well. I just kind of want to dive deeper on, but we'll go to the audience first. So the first question that came in was, due to the pandemic, have you found it harder to communicate with your teams and educate individuals and teams on how best to communicate?
So yes and yes would be the answer to both of those. I think the first question, as far as is it harder to communicate? I think what I found, and I've also found this through teaching at a university. I teach a college course, and we've had a very similar conversation amongst the professors, where we find that those that are listening and participating in this kind of medium that we have now are not absorbing as much. So some of it's an exercise in how do I articulate in maybe smaller chunks, but there's also the necessity of sort of repeating things over and over and over again, not necessarily in the same conversation, but just making sure we're reinforcing and bringing topics back to life over and over again. I got frustrated, I think, in the very beginning, where I'm like, why am I saying the same thing over and over again? But I think it's just a product of even some of the things that were listed in that slide on, the impact of COVID. It's just, we got a lot of distractions. We're in new environments, et cetera. As far as training the team, I think a lot of this kind of sort of moves from what I just said into practicals of, how do we start breaking down information? Can we look at our communication channels? Maybe we're communicating in larger sessions where my team has a number of different audiences, from application protocols to different types of leadership. And instead of doing these broad communications, which people unfortunately are probably typing and doing other things while they're listening to it. We've targeted this so that it's really valuable to that person, and there's a greater chance that they'll pay attention to it and hopefully retain some of it.
No, really good answer. Thanks, Tom. And then another question, kind of looking at digital tools. To what extent do digital tools have a place in the workplace with regards to communications and collaboration?
I think they have a tremendous role in the workplace. I think it's like any tool. There used to be a saying, like, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. We have to make sure we're using the right tool for the right job, and then being considerate of what the effectiveness of that tool is. And sometimes we have to use multiple tools to accomplish maybe something that we would have been able to do simply in person. So a lot of follow-up, again, if it comes to communication. Oftentimes I try to have, I've created what's called an executive overview deck, which doesn't sound like anything mind-blowing, but I actually created the deck using the Todd principle. So when I meet with executive levels, et cetera, they choose the top level of the deck if they just want the topic, and then they can kind of drill in depending on what their need is at the time. So I'm trying to take that concept and use it and look at the tools and say, what level of communication is this tool good for? And try to use those tools effectively.
Sure, and with that, I guess there's a case with a lot of enterprises and large organizations that kind of throw everything at kind of digital tools, and we've got overloaded with applications, both web-based and desktop-based. Is there the temptation for organizations to go too hard on shiny kind of new tech and forget about traditional ways of communicating, the more effective ways?
Absolutely. And I've been going through that sort of expansion and contraction of tools. Like, we see something else, like, hey, this communication isn't working, we add another tool. And then, you wind up with the same information in different versions and 5 different pieces of technology. The question I keep to the forefront, and I think this is also something from product design UX that any UXer should be able to, this should roll off their tongue almost like water, which is, what is the problem we're trying to solve?
Sure.
And it is interesting. It's such a simple question, but whenever we start talking about technologies and I think we can do this, and here's the tactical approach, I'm like, whoa, everybody back up. What are we trying to solve here? If it's just this piece of communication, how do we do that? Let's not build an entire system. Let's not make this complex labyrinth of, communication strategy. Let's figure out what that problem is. And not always, but oftentimes it's simpler than where I think we went. And then part of it's, we're just creative, technologists. So we think in these complexities, but sometimes the answer is more simple and succinct.
Sure, no, good answer. And then towards the end of that presentation, we were touching on email. A lot of kind of articles and thought leadership pieces come up with the idea that email is dead or is on the decline, or is being phased out. It's something I've personally not seen. I spend pretty much my life on email, but there are a lot of kind of thought leaders in the space and communications experts, new age tech people that are, essentially saying that email will be dead in kind of 5-10 years, whatever. What's kind of your take on that statement?
All right. Well, I'm going to say something in here that maybe this will be the laugh for everybody in the morning. I'm going to give everybody a chuckle, but I don't understand why email isn't dead already. Back 20 years ago, in the late 80s, I lose track of time. I was working on a product called Lotus Notes, and this is where people can start laughing. Wow, you use Lotus Notes? When IBM bought it, it became Domino, et cetera. Anyway, I built an entire global network based on Lotus Notes, and one of the beauties of it was the email interface was a database just like anything else in that environment. And it was all interactive. So when you got an email, it wasn't actually an email, it was actually a piece of a database that you were getting to interact with. And when you interacted with it, it didn't just sit in your email as in your box as a dead document. It actually updated the entire system. So I can't understand why we did that 20 years ago using the Lotus Notes technology, and we haven't really evolved. I mean, we got some fancier features and it looks a little nicer, but so I hope it's dead in 5 years, but I think it's kind of more of a zombie at this point, walking around torturing us.
Nice. And then during the course of the pandemic, a lot has changed in a lot of ways, particularly within the enterprise and organizational structure. How much of kind of communication principles changed in the last 12 months? And, how has Todd, from your presentation, evolved a lot during those 12 months and learned a lot in terms of the way things need approaching and the way things need looking at? Has that changed?
I'm not sure if it's changed, but I think certain qualities of communication have been emphasized. I think, the succinct nature of trying to think of the intelligence that we want to move forward, as I talked a lot about during my presentation, is one of the things.
Mm-hmm.
I think another aspect of this is it's called to the carpet a number of folks who have not worked on their presentation ability. Because, as someone who's been a teacher in the classroom, I love that energy. I love that ability to interact, the dynamic quality of it, and you feel the void when that is gone. When COVID first hit, we were fortunately on spring break. We extended spring break so we can all scramble and figure out how we're going to teach our classes remotely. I think I had a little bit easier time being a technologist, and I'm not intimidated by technology. But wow, I left my first class and I even asked my students, I'm like, guys, I don't think this was a really great experience. Does anybody have any thoughts? And we worked through it, but I just felt like, wow, I was getting nothing back. I was totally drained. So it made me rethink a lot of things, like how am I presenting my information? How do I create excitement and engagement? I haven't really come up with like solid answers on that. I think I'm still trying to figure that out. A lot of it I think is on me personally, but that's what I've seen kind of come to life with some of the challenges we have in this new work environment.
Good stuff. Well, Tom, that's all we've got time for. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us today, and of course for the presentation to open the day. We've had some nice comments coming in and on the conference chat, so really do appreciate it. And of course, it's good to see you in this capacity again, and hopefully we'll have you back on a real physical stage at some point in the near future.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, and I'm digging the beard. Nicely done.
Thanks. It's it's lockdown. The barbers are shut. Why not?